Good evening. Welcome to the November Burnsville Economic Development Commission meeting. Looking to adopt the agenda tonight.
I'll make a motion to adopt the agenda for this evening.
Second.
Thank you. Chris, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Adoption of the minutes from September 13th, 2017's meeting. Again, looking for a motion.
So moved.
I'll say it.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Great. Review of development tools.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The item before you was at a council work session last month in October, and we presented proposed amendments to 3 of our, what at that time would have been called business subsidy policies, and 2 draft potential new policies. Council basically, the consensus was that they would like to adopt the amendments and the 2 policies. They did not have a discussion at that work session on funding. There's a couple of them that will need some funding. And they did want to have them come before the Economic Development Commission for your review and recommendations. And what I would like to do, Mr. Chair, is take the policies one at a time and then get your recommendations per each policy. The City of Burnsville currently has what is called a business subsidy policy. This is basically our large policy that covers the TIF and the tax abatement and everything else. The proposed amendments were to rename it the Development Tools Policy. There's been some discussion from council that they don't like the use of the word subsidy. In the policy, the term business subsidy is used many times. The suggestion is that be changed to a terminology that reads business assistance. Currently, that policy does not allow the use of TIF or tax abatement in what is known as the Burnsville Retail Center area, which is basically the shopping centers that form the ring around the Burnsville Center. The amendment would allow TIF and abatement in the Burnsville Center retail area. The policy currently does not allow staff to approach the various strip centers for purposes of having discussions about redevelopment. It's only if the strip center would come to us. The proposed amendment is that staff could approach strip centers and have discussions with them about possible redevelopment. The policy currently does not allow the use of TIF or abatement in any of our strip centers if it's going to be a rental property as the redevelopment. The amendment calls for that to be changed and allow that for rental properties. Again, the council consensus was to adopt all of these amendments. I would certainly stand for any questions you have, and these changes would have no additional cost to the city. And then we would look for a recommendation from the commissioners. And Mr. Chair, I'd take any questions.
One question I have is that the law of the TIF and the abatement of the rental property, is that defined as it becoming multifamily then, or would another commercial use would also be applicable to that?
The policy, when it addresses rental property, it's referring to residential rental, so multifamily apartments, things like that. This change would allow that type of use, for example, to be some of the redevelopment of the Burnsville Center. So an outlot of the Burnsville Center could be an apartment building, which if the proposed eventual Orange Line terminus is out by the Burnsville Center, that would be a logical place that you may want to build an apartment building.
But if an office tower went in there, that would apply to the same use, same
That
policy?
would not.
Or no?
That would be if we remove the restriction to use TIF and abatement in the Burnsville Retail Center area, then yes, Commissioner, okay, we could do TIF for or for an office tower on the Burnsville Center or someplace else there.
Okay.
And my question is, why was the TIF and the tax abatement not in the policy before? And what's the advantage of putting it in now? What's the catalyst?
Commissioner, the theory back when we adopted a policy regarding strip center redevelopment, we looked at all of our strip centers, and back then, this is probably about a dozen years ago, 15 years ago, back then, the strip centers around the Burnsville Center area were doing exceptionally well. And they basically were feeding off of the Burnsville Center area. Some of the outlying strip centers did not do quite as well. You may recall, we actually took one, Valley Ridge, and completely demoed it and built a senior a facility there. So the theory was, there's no reason to incentivize redevelopment of the shopping centers around the Burnsville Center area that are living off of the Burnsville Center. What we've now found is that's kind of flip-flopped. And if we have strip centers that are struggling, they have a tendency to be the strip centers right by the Burnsville Center retail area. So by removing this restriction, we can give them the same opportunities to go through a redevelopment process as any of our other strip centers. To date, we have not had a strip center utilize TIF or tax abatement for redevelopment, because if you're doing basically facade renovations, you're not going to generate enough income or enough increment to make a difference, to make it work. But in the case of something like the Burnsville Center, we could be looking at major redevelopment there, that this may be a good tool to have. So that's the theory of why we would change it now.
Okay.
And the reason why you want to allow staff to approach is because you think the current owners are reluctant, or they haven't done any approach in the past?
I don't know that they're reluctant, Commissioner. What we have found is that, and this policy, as you've probably already seen in a couple of our other suggested amendments, is having staff never being allowed to talk to anyone about redevelopment unless they come to us. Some of them may not even realize there are tools available to them for redevelopment. So if we can, if we can go to a struggling center and say, if you wanted to redevelop the center, we would have some tools to help you, would be a plus, as opposed to them coming to us. They may not even know that there would be tools to come to us to talk about.
So do you anticipate staff just being able to have that conversation, or do you think there's a backlog and a lot of energy that they're gonna start doing it in earnest?
I see it more of being available to do that.
Okay,
We're not gonna go canvass all the strip centers in Burnsville and say, if we give you a little bit of money, will you tear it all down and build something new?
That's exactly, I was trying to gauge the temperature, thank you.
It's not a horrible idea. I was gonna ask, in that same policy regarding I think it's the Burnsville Center retail area, but, so it looks like the idea is to take a lot of the shall nots and get rid of them and give the city more flexibility in what it, and how it can assist in development efforts.
Correct.
There's one area that's still in here. I just wanna make sure I understand if there was a reason for it. There's a forms of assistance section, says city and the authority shall not use the city's bonding capacity in the form of an upfront payment to the applicant to support redevelopment of aging retail strip centers. That's a very specific restriction. Is there a reason that would need to stay in?
Commissioner, when we do TIF and tax abatement, we typically do it on what is called a pay-go. We do not do a total upfront. So if we know over a 15-year period of time, there will be X amount of dollars available, we do not write a check to the developer for all of that upfront. We do it on a year by year as they pay their taxes. That's why that's in there, and that's our policy in all of our TIF and abatement areas.
Okay, I only saw it in the strip center. I must not have caught it in the other ones. Okay, thank you.
Well, one of the things I was wondering about as we go through here, and there's been a lot of changes as far as the retail environment, obviously, since this was first looked at. But our presentation, I believe, in the July meeting centered around strip centers being one of the bright spots in overall national retail currently. And I was just wondering, as we go through this, if we incent some of these retail strip centers to maybe not improve their current retail strip center, but to redevelop into something else, are we missing out on possible gains or shifts in the retail area by getting rid of, or possibly incenting the community to get rid of some of these strip centers?
Commissioner, I believe that we would look at that as an owner decision. If the owner does not believe that the strip center can continue to function as a strip center and looks to redevelop to something else, that's what we would look at. I don't know that we would, I don't see any reason why a successful strip center would redevelop to something totally different just because they could get a little bit of TIF assistance.
Right, no, I was just, it appeared to me that possibly the only real incentive that we'd have out there for any of the strip center would be to convert to something else as opposed to improving their current use.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes, that's absolutely correct.
Okay.
Unless we adopt some later policies we're gonna talk about for renovation and our.
Right.
our-
Okay.
Actually, renovation, no, but possibly demo if they wanna demo it. But we're not really looking to assist a strip center in a facade renovation.
Okay.
So that's helpful. So the term redevelopment doesn't mean updating and contemporizing the current retail establishment.
They certainly could, and we would give them TIF. But so far, any strip center that has run the numbers, the TIF that they would get is not
Is not
worth
substantial enough. Okay.
getting. And in a couple of cases, the actual application and escrow money to go through the TIF process would exceed the TIF that they would give, because a renovation a facade renovation just doesn't increase your taxes enough to create anything. I think I've confused you, Commissioner.
I don't know why, your taxes or the revenue, the profitability of the retail establishment could be improved?
Oh, absolutely.
But you're
But
suggesting that.
TIF has nothing to do with profitability. TIF is based on property taxes.
Right, so you would not assess a higher property tax on an improved strip mall?
Not typically a facade renovation is not gonna generate a major increase in property taxes. Would it increase the possible tenant base and the type of tenant and the amount of lease rate that they could? Absolutely, it will do all of those things, but that is not relative to the property taxes that they pay.
Okay, thanks.
Any further questions?
I had
Dan?
one other real specific one on the development tools on the business subsidy. And you have in policy number 2, number G, it states that the authority must have a public meeting for any assistance under $100,000 does not include job and wage growth. And I was wondering if you want to put a minimum on that. That means if you have someone that wants to do a $10,000 change, they would have to do a public appeal. Would it-
What number are you referring to, Commissioner?
It's under the development tool, public policy 1136. It's this one right here.
There is no 1136, Commissioner. Oh, yeah, that's the policy number. Which, I'm sorry, which
It's G.
G? Okay, and if they do not have job and wage goals, you don't think we should have a public hearing if it's less than 100,000? Is that the question?
No, my question is, everyone less than 100,000 requires a public hearing. How about if someone has a $10,000 issue?
The policy as it's written is if it doesn't include job and wage goals and it's less than $100,000, you do. If it had job and wage goals, you would not.
Is the purpose of that to incent people to have some sort of a public good come out of the,
The
or
purpose of
community
that
good?
is to follow legislative statute.
Okay.
All right, that's fine. I didn't know it was legislatively driven.
Almost all TIF and tax abatement policies, Commissioner, are legislatively driven.
Do we need a separate motion on each policy?
I believe so,
Yes,
right?
if we could, please, Mr. Chair.
I'll make a motion for the commission to recommend adoption of the red line business subsidy policy.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed signify by the same sign.
Thank you, Commissioners. The city also has a policy regarding the sale and rental of city property. Staff has recommended that there be one change in that policy. Currently, that policy requires that a buyer, at the buyer's expense, get an appraisal anytime that they want to purchase city property. We have had instances in which we already have an appraisal that's only a couple of years old, and a new appraisal is really not going to change the appraisal price, but because it's our policy, we would require the buyer to go get a new appraisal. Right now, typical appraisal for us is usually running somewhere between $4,000 and $6,000. Staff's recommendation is that if we have an appraisal on file, that we not require a new appraisal and not require that expense of the business that wants to buy the property. Again, there would be no additional cost for adopting this amendment to the city. City Council's consensus was to make this adoption. Again, Mr. Chair, I'd stand for questions, and we would look for your recommendation.
Any questions?
My question is, I mean, appraisals can fluctuate over a period of time. Is there, I mean, if there's a appraisal on file from 10 years ago, that's gonna be considered, was that considered to be sufficient, or was there any discussion of putting a cap on how far back the appraisal?
There was no discussion on a cap, Mr. Commissioner.
Okay. I'm only thinking of,
Certainly if.
well, an appraisal done in 2007 on property is gonna be very different from an appraisal done in 2010 on the same property, so I wasn't sure if it's worth some type of temporal restriction on.
Certainly, that could be a recommendation of the EDC, that the appraisal has to be within a certain amount of years.
I'll just throw it up as a question. for
That
the
was
group.
my question as well, Commissioner. I like where you're going on that, because I agree with that. I presume that it was initially in there to avoid any surprises or people being upset with the city and just open communication on values. I'm guessing, I don't know. But if that's the intent, which I think is probably a good intent, I would say that probably a 3-year time period would be relevant.
That's
And
reasonable.
and anything more than that was probably not as relevant in dynamic times.
Any other questions? We could make a motion with that,
To add the 3-year,
right?
You certainly can, Mr.
I so moved, add 3-year limit on the proposal.
Any further discussion? Do we have a second?
Yeah, I was going to say,
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign.
Thank you, Commissioners. Currently, the city has a guideline for land assembly. It is not an official policy. Staff has proposed that we actually amend it to be a policy. The current guideline, similar to what was in our business subsidy policy as it relates to strip centers, the current guideline does not allow staff to approach property owners. It only allows us to respond to property owners coming to us. The recommendation is that staff be allowed to contact private property owners about selling their property. This policy, if we adopt it, would need a funding source. Obviously, we cannot buy property without money. Council did have a consensus to adopt this as a policy and adopt that we could talk to private property owners. Councilmember Coughlin, however, did not support, so it was a 4-to-1. Again, Mr. Chair, I would stand for questions, and we would look for a recommendation.
Could you help me out? What is the guidance for land assembly? What does that exactly mean?
I'm sorry, Commissioner.
Sorry.
Did not-
What is the guidance for land assembly? What is that? What would that be?
For example, Commissioner, if we wanted to go down and look at, say in the MRQ, multiple parcels and buying all of them and consolidating them into one larger parcel to facilitate some sort of larger, development in that area.
Okay.
We did have, you may recall last year, we brought forward a TIF agreement to you for a potential buyer of some land in the MRQ that needed like a parcel and a half. The private entity was going through that process. This would actually allow us to go down there and assemble some possible parcels and put them together for new development.
Jeff?
So I like the intent of this, in that the city potentially would act as an economic engine, if done properly, to cause redevelopment to occur. What I'm a little concerned about is the wording that starts, could allow the city to purchase the property to ensure development that is the highest and best use of the property. To me, that almost starts to sound a little bit like governance, which potentially blocks other buyers out. And I don't think that's the intent at all, but it sounds that way to me a little bit. And I'm wondering if it would be best to say this would allow the city to negotiate with a landowner who has property on the market, period. And maybe I'm just reading it wrong or reading
wrong
wrong.
doc-
I would, Commissioner, I would, then it gives the city even more leeway. Right now, they have to justify it under some usage that they allegedly have the best use in mind. If they just want to go start bidding on property, if it's unconstrained, then you've complicated it.
And just to clarify, that phrase is not in the actual policy, right? Is that that's in the background? Commissioner, what you were reading, I just want to make sure. So the phrase, to purchase the property to ensure development that is the highest and best use of the property, that is not the actual language.
So that's just the
Doesn't
background
reflect
to
that
it. I
statement.
see.
Yeah, the language, the language states, opportunities for the council to acquire, council for the city to acquire interest in properties by purchase options, right of first refusal, toward the goal of assisting private developers in being able to acquire parcels that are large enough and unencumbered by negative conditions to be economically viable for their proposed projects.
Oh, and I'm okay with that
No,
language.
and I agree with you, that's why I wanted to make sure that I understood
that's good.
And I can tell you, Commissioner, though, however, it's somewhat unlikely that the city's going to engage in buying parcels that won't be put to the highest and best use. Nor would city council unleash city staff en masse to go talk to all property owners about selling their property. And of course, as the city can't buy any property without city council approval.
I guess I wonder in going through this, if the staff are allowed to contact property owners in regard to possible purchase of parcels, and just have that blanket authorization out there. I just wonder if that might be counterproductive in some instances. If there are private entities that are looking at purchasing it, would not the private entity possibly contact these people first? Or I feel as though if the city is going to be reaching out and talking to people about selling the property, that specific project should be authorized by the council prior to the staff reaching out. I just feel like
I
this.
understand where you're going, Commissioner. I will tell you that in the development world, very often you have people that want to keep their project confidential until they're ready to move. So to go first to the council probably would cause that development to move to another city. What we're looking for is if a developer comes to us and says, I think I'd like to build a technology center in the MRQ, but I need 3 parcels. Would the city go down and assemble those, go through that process and assemble those parcels for me and then sell them to me?
So, what we're saying is that the city would somehow then contact the landowners, assemble the parcels, purchase the parcels without any sort of public approval?
Absolutely not, Commissioner.
Okay.
The policy
At that
re-
point, they would have to come
yeah,
to
the policy
council.
requires the council to be the one to make
The
the
council.
to approve the acquisition.
But the conversations about whether those parcels could be assembled, in many cases, a developer would like to have that as a confidential conversations because there are competitive issues that exist.
So the fact that it's missing a funding source, or putting a little cart before the horse, I think, in terms of the nuances, because if we have no money to fund this, no one's gonna go out and talk to them.
That's absolutely correct, Commissioner.
Has the council thought about how they plan to fund this?
No, they're hoping for you to come up with a recommendation, Commissioner.
So I thought,
That's why this body exists.
okay, good. I'm just trying to.
No,
So-
we
so
took,
All I'm saying is, we can debate the finer points of who approaches who and everything, but if we don't have a funding source, we'll spend an hour, or some good, I'm not debating the importance of that, but if we don't have a funding source, it's mute. I mean, this has no teeth. Unless they want to just put something out there with the hope that someday we develop a funding source.
I still don't understand why a person wouldn't just go to a broker to do this for them. Why would the city even be involved? I'm confused.
I believe you have a commissioner that wants to
So
respond to
I want to
that.
give an example of that. Right now, we have been hired by a city, a city and an economic development arm to go and assemble 7 parcels of land for a large user, unnamed.
You being a broker.
Me and our firm,
Okay,
we're
good.
serving as a commercial real estate broker. So we have, the city is able to participate and operate on that, but it's all contingent upon final approval by the city council in the actual acquisition, if they participate in that versus the user buying the land themselves. But they are given the right to at least engage us and get us going on that in a confidential manner on that land. And without this kind of language, the city couldn't even really do that, to hire somebody, whether it's the city directly or to hire somebody to go and be able to try to assemble land quietly for potential use, if I'm understanding correctly.
That is correct, Commissioner.
Although, in the examples that have been provided, it appears that private owners or investors are approaching the city with a request, which would be, the policy as it stands right now, completely allows the city to have those communications, because someone approached the city, right? This is being amended to say staff may contact, so they can
If
do.
a property owner would approach the city and say, is the city interested, would the city be interested in buying my property? Yes, Commissioner, we can
Right.
have that conversation.
Yep.
As the guideline exists right now, the example that Commissioner LaFave gave, we could not go approach some property owners and say, would you be willing to
No,
sell?
I understand you can't go and approach, but.
Why-
so
why can't the
i-
broker
in-
go and
in-
approach?
Individually.
Yeah.
Right, no,
I don't get why the
I'm in
city's
favor of the
involved.
change, I just want to make sure that understood that there's a material reason for having the city be approached by a broker. And at
In many
that,
cases, it
so a
would
broker
not
could
be a
approach
broker.
the city right now, and the city could say, that's great. If you find landowners that want to talk to us, have them contact us and we can talk to them. And you're saying this would reverse that, and a broker could approach you and you could say, okay, have the conversation, you can reach out to the landowners directly.
And in not every case is there a broker involved.
I'm just giving an example where the city would be the one initiating the question. Could I quickly ask if you can say, it was important for you to include that Councilmember Coughlin did not support? Could you provide why?
That's just so you know that this was not a consensus.
Yeah, why didn't he support it?
Because he knows that if it comes to a point in which this has to be funded, he does not want to fund it by any type of a tax increase, which is probably the only way to fund it.
The question I have in regard to this is, without a specific project and it being sort of a blanket approval, what sort of risk does the city put themselves in doing this land assembly for a private party versus how it could be done via other means? When these properties are assembled, the city decides to purchase all of them. They have them all now. What is the risk that the private entity chooses then not to purchase them from the city, and the city has now assembled blocks of land that their intended user has now left?
There's always a risk in land development, Commissioner.
Correct.
And then we own land that we can then sell to someone else.
Right, but there's inherent greater risk in land development than other sorts of development, and so that's why I was just wondering exactly why we would want to loosen up our policy to allow us to take on greater risk in that land development.
I think it comes to the philosophical discussion of, do you want to drive development or sit and wait? And certainly, if the commission wishes to make that recommendation not to change this, you can certainly make that recommendation.
Can I ask if this type of assembly policy is more or less common for competing?
Most of these cities that came to the work session and spoke to the council in some fashion have assembled policy and are bought land for a variety of reasons, including something going on the market and a city knowing that a potential buyer would come for a development that they would just as soon not have. A city has gone and bought that parcel to prevent that from happening, and hence then marketed for a higher and better use.
Yeah, and that's why I just bring it up that to the extent that this is we're competing with other cities for development, and if this can be an effective tool for the city to accelerate the development process and be competitive, understanding that the financing has to come, it's kind of, again, one of those, is it worth, it's beneficial for the city to have the tool, even if it doesn't use it, than to not be able to use it at all, would be my opinion. And so I'll make the motion, but.
I lost you there. What, it'd be better to have what?
I would just rather have them allow the city to have the option
Of
and
what?
of contacting the landowners than have be a prohibition and have them not even have the choice.
But they have no money. What are they
You'd have to
contacting
decide
about?
that, I mean, that question will come.
Why pass something that you can't implement?
I don't think it's been decided whether it can be implemented or not.
You have no money. What are you gonna buy? You have no source.
So Commissioner, I'd argue it's a bit of a chicken and the egg game. You've got to do one first. You can go out and raise the money without a plan or a policy to be able to spend the money, or you can put the policy in place and then think about raising the money. And I think we should put the policy in place first and then think about whether it's today or 10 years from now or never, at least have that ability to then raise the money down the road. I think that the redevelopment, though, is to be more proactive on some of these areas that we need to be more proactive, whether it's a land assembly for a specific use, of which then you can immediately justify that investment in real estate. We've got to leave it up to our commission, or more really the city council and the planning commission, to make those decisions, and those are easy to justify. Or is it something like Bloomington just did, where they acquired land for the World's Fair on the east side of the Mall of America, which is a little bit harder to justify, but for proposed use down the road. So I think those decisions are probably left to the city council and the planning commission, but I think the right to do that is good for us to be able to be more proactive in some of the redevelopment that needs to be done in the city.
I would agree. I think that is something for the city council and the planning commission, but it appears as though, based on the way the policy is drafted, that this is moving it down to the city staff versus the planning commission and the city council.
Again, if I
I would
could,
qualify that.
Commissioner.
I think you said it's our job.
The city is not going to purchase any property without approval by the city council. And yes, Commissioner, the first step would be a recommendation from the Economic Development Commission as to whether or not to buy that property. But could staff have discussions with folks? Yes, absolutely. if this policy was adopted.
Well, Commissioner Turner, I believe you had a motion.
I'll make the motion for the commission to recommend adoption of the red line guideline for land assembly as drafted.
I'll second it.
Have a second? Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Opposed?
Thank you, Commissioners. The next item is a policy that is not in existence, but is a draft policy. And this policy basically is looking to establish the ability of the city to assist in demolition of older buildings. It would be guided by the fact that we would only do it if the development is going to be a type of development that we are looking to have. It would have to be immediate redevelopment, so we would not be looking to assist a building owner in tearing down a building and then letting the land sit and sell the land somewhere in the future at a profit. As proposed, we would do somewhere between 50% and possibly 100% of the demolition. Again, all of that would be guided by what is the actual redevelopment use going to be. There is a clause in there that if the redevelopment does not occur as it's been agreed to in the agreement, then the default option is whatever amount of money we spent on the demolition would be paid back to the city. Obviously, this policy, if adopted, does need a funding source. Again, there was council consensus to adopt with council members Coughlin and Schultz not supporting. So it was a 3-2 at the work session to adopt this policy. Again, Mr. Chair, I would stand for questions and we would be looking for a recommendation.
Questions?
Could you expand on what options there are for the funding? In the past, there've been some levies and things like that considered other cities use.
Commissioner, for the most part, the cities that presented to the city council, I shouldn't say every city, but most cities have an EDA, as we have an EDA. Legislatively, an EDA can levy. There is a formula that guides how much of a levy can be proposed every year. For example, in the city of Burnsville, our maximum EDA levy next year would be approximately $1.1 million. As we move into the final stages of setting the budget for next year, our current EDA levy will be somewhere in the $600,000 range. So the difference between what we're going to levy and what we could levy if we wanted to is somewhere in the $4.5 million range. Many of the cities that spoke to our city council do the maximum EDA levy. When staff put next year's budget together in June, staff's proposal was an EDA levy that basically would continue to do the things we've done in the past. In September, when we got to the point where the city council has to put in the max tax levy, the city council actually added $75,000 to the EDA levy. There is still some discussion about what that $75,000 could or would be used for, and until the budget is formally adopted next month, that $75,000 could be removed back out of that levy if so desired by council/EDA. It looks like I may have confused you, Commissioner.
Oh, no, I'm just thinking, what, this levy, is it via bonds and are they paid back over time?
No, this is a tax.
It's a tax, and the tax is incurred how? Through property tax?
Correct.
So it's a line, is it a line item on the property tax
No, it's included
in the mill rate?
all of your taxes, yes.
Okay, so it's included
Yes.
in whatever mill rate they establish?
Yes.
So let me ask you this, if we increased it to the 1.1 million, has city determined what impact that would make on property taxes?
No, we have not. Because we're not doing that.
And the reason you're not doing that?
Is because we've already set the max tax, we can't do it.
Okay, so
For next year.
For next year. So a
Yes.
year from now, we could, though.
Yes, the EDA could if they so desired.
And so this commission could advance that concept that if you're gonna, serious about development, let's fund it.
Yes, that could be a recommendation of this commission.
Because along your lines, I'm in favor of redevelopment, but I want to figure out how we're going to fund it. And we might as well start the conversation now so we can implement it next year. We're already a year behind. We missed the window. We've already missed the Burnsville budget's locked and loaded. We can't come Johnny come lately, but a year from now we could. That way we give this, if we do approve these things, we give them what obviously the city council wants us to have a healthy conversation about how we're gonna fund this, and is this city serious about development?
I actually think in many cases, the demolition's a little bit easier problem to solve. Because oftentimes, let's say somebody's gonna pay $3 per square foot for a piece of land with a building on it that needs to be demolished. So once you demolish that building, if you're a private investor, you demolish that building, clean up that land parcel, make sure it's ready for market. So the buyer gets the benefit of being able to go to market much faster, but now you change the price to reflect that investment in the real estate. So maybe it's $3.50 a foot now. So in return, rather than having to raise a tax, oftentimes on the demolition side, you're able to just recover it in the land price increase.
No, I like the policy in general. I think it will be helpful. One of the things is going through here, there's a scorecard system, a little bit of a worksheet here, or
Correct, Commissioner.
the person would fill out. However, that doesn't appear there's any guidance as far as any sort of minimum score that the city would be looking for as far as investing in. And I guess I would recommend, I don't know what that score would be, but that we have some sort of a minimum attainment of goals before the city would invest in something like this.
And again, if that's the recommendation of this body, we could certainly take that to council. I believe staff's thought was that we would never engage in helping in the demolition of a building unless the redevelopment was a redevelopment that the city was interested in having.
Right, and based on the worksheet here, I mean, what would that be? Would that be a score of 16 or a score of 20?
Absolutely nothing to
or-
do with the score, Commissioner. We're looking for high job type of redevelopment. If somebody was gonna want us to participate in a demolition and they were gonna do a new building that didn't have high job, that's not something that the city council would probably be interested in.
Right, no, I completely understand that, and that's why I would think that the scorecard would reflect something that would be consistent with whatever those goals were. If it's a high job, then we would lean more points towards the job creation and the salary earned from those jobs, and that would be reflected in the score. That would be part of the decision-making process. I see that as possibly more fair if the application and the score worksheet would have some sort of guidance on it, or the policy would have some sort of guidance on it as far as some minimum goals to obtain. Otherwise, it could vary or change considerably over time, depending on, who is sitting in the chairs, and it wouldn't be quite as objective.
Again, we say, the scoring system that's used in this policy is pretty much the same scoring system used in our TIF and tax abatement. So if you'd like to go back and recommend we amend that also, we can do that.
Is the score, the higher the score, the more likely that you're eligible for funds, or the higher the score, the more closer you are to 100% reimbursement than 50%?
I would say that
Maybe that's what I wasn't sure I understood which one it was applying to.
the score is not totally indicative of whether or not, it's in a TIF or a tax abatement, it would go forward. The score is kind of a guideline of how this is fitting in. But if we're looking at demoing a building because a new developer wants to build a technology-type building, and the jobs are gonna be $70,000, $80,000, $90,000, that's a much more preferred use by the city than if someone comes to us and says, I'd like to demo this building, and I'm gonna fill it up with $9.50 an hour workers.
But, so the score is simply gonna be indicative of the value of the redevelopment.
To a certain extent.
Other than that, it still might be, you could have two redevelopments, same score, one's gonna get 50%, one's gonna get 90%.
That's a possibility,
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
Yes.
Would-
It's a
would-
council decision. It's not an automatic, you
Right.
score this, you're gonna get this.
Right, but if we look back at the tax abatement policy, it does assign points value in term of assistance based on the points value. So there is a use for the score in that policy. It doesn't appear that there's a use for the score, and I guess my thought is I wouldn't even necessarily score it if it doesn't have any bearing on the decision being made. I would either remove the point system entirely or establish some use for the point system rather than just having somebody fill the sheet out.
Certainly, Commissioner, we can have that recommendation.
Yeah, I agree with Commissioner Folkstead there on that. There's no point system within this demolition one. The tax abatement one has one that gives you a guideline to how many years of tax abatement assistance can be available to the new business owner, whereas the demolition one, you just have a worksheet and then it just kind of ends at that point.
So could the point score be used that if there's a minimum threshold met, then at least they're eligible for the fund? Whatever, the 50% or 100 is still gonna be discretionary, but at least they'll hit enough proof to show that the redevelopment project would be worthwhile.
That's what I was going with. I mean, it's an eligibility and maybe not necessarily an automatic, but that would allow
You
the person
met
to
a
proceed.
threshold to keep the discussion going.
I guess otherwise, so every time somebody submitted one of these applications, would the staff be obligated to bring it before the council or the planning commission or economic development commission to review? And if it scores 1 point out of 25, is that something that we'd want to spend our time reviewing?
I would hope, Commissioner, that if it got to that point, yes, you would take the time to review it. And, I mean, you're assuming that staff would let something that's not a very good project get to that point.
No, what I'm concerned about is the staff wouldn't have any way to provide initial review, that they would
absolutely.
they would be obligated to move forward, and so.
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Staff does it all the time. It's very simple, Commissioner. It's a statement that says the likelihood of council approving what you're asking for is not very high. And there is a cost of you taking it to council. We as staff would recommend, it may not be a good idea to spend that money because the likelihood of council saying yes is very, very slim. There is an understanding that staff has some idea of the wants of the city council and what they would or would not approve. Are we 100% right all the time? No, we're obviously not. But we know there are certain projects that are not going to be things that the council would want to approve.
Okay. I guess as far as a motion, I would motion to approve the building demolition policy as presented with the recommendation that city council provide a minimum score threshold for eligibility for consideration for building demolition funds.
Can I ask another question? What brought this up, that you want this policy in the first place? Is this an issue? Do we need to incentivize people, or Why do we have it?
Commissioner, we have had in the past, we have been approached by developers who have proposed a development that we know city council would like to have. And they would like to do the development on a piece of property that has an empty building on it. And they have told staff, if the city would be willing to clear that building, we'd be willing to buy the land and do the development. And in the past, the obvious answer from city staff has been, well, we have no mechanism to do that for you, and the developer has moved on.
Okay.
Can I ask another question? And I don't, I'm not entirely familiar with how the city enforces a provision like failure to meet the completion date. So in these, the city would pay for the demolition, but if the completion date in the assistance agreement isn't completed, it results in repayment. What exactly, so obviously the city comes back to the developer and says, didn't work out, you now owe us money. Is that, okay, they say no, or I can't, or the whole thing fell apart, and then the city just engages in a collection effort?
That's correct.
To recover
That's
that amount?
That's correct, Commissioner.
And this is gonna be the same case for the, not to jump ahead, is this gonna be the same case for the renovation grant policy as well?
That would be correct. If they defaulted on the contract, we would seek to have our money returned.
And is this common in a lot of other redevelopment tools that are used by the city?
Well, currently, the only redevelopment tools we have are TIF and tax abatement. And that is money that we are paying to you after you
A
pay
little
your
bit different,
taxes.
right.
But typically, in our land purchase agreements, we have a clause that if you do not meet the commencement and completion dates of the development that you said you're gonna build on that land the city sold to you, we get the land back, we put it back on the market, and when we sell it, we subtract our expenses, and we give the balance. So if you miss your completion and commencement dates and default, you'll end up losing money.
Right, but you don't actually have to engage in collection, because there you get the land, you just subtract it off the
That's
off
correct.
the sale. Thanks.
I just want to go back to the funding. Do you have an estimate of how many homes are in Burnsville?
I'm sorry, Commissioner, off the top of my head, I do not.
Say there were 10,000, for the sake of conversation. If we increase the levy by 600,000, that would be $60 per home. What I'm trying to do is gauge if in fact we do increase the levy and allow some funding mechanisms, what would the tax impact be?
Well, I would also say that you also need to count in all the commercial properties, Commissioner.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm just, rough estimate.
We have a motion on the floor.
You do not have a second, Mr. Chair.
That is correct.
I'll second.
What's the motion?
The motion is to approve the draft building demolition policy and recommend to city council to provide a minimum threshold of score for the application to be considered for the building demolition funds.
Just clarification before we vote. Are we going to discuss the funding? Are we going to pass on that tonight, guys?
Commissioner, that is the last thing that we're going to be asking you for as a recommendation on how to fund these, correct?
So it's, or so we're not voting, because this accepts this proposal, so we're going to come back to funding. So this is just in principle, this proposal.
That would be correct, Commissioner.
Okay, fine.
Any further discussion?
I have just one thing. So Commissioner Fogelstad, I understand the score sheet. I'm not opposed to that. The score sheet that's out there now, a lot of it is tied to jobs. And staff had mentioned that a lot of times when they make these decisions, they tie to jobs. The only thing that I would caution staff about is one of the big growth areas right now, hot growth areas, are data centers. Data centers are significant investments that increase tax bases pretty dramatically for a community. Utilities, of course, like them because of the use of the electrical power, but they don't always provide a lot of jobs. The jobs that are there are good jobs, but there's not a lot of jobs. And so I want to make sure that we allow for that too. Chaska, for instance, has landed United Health Group and US Bank data centers, significant data center investments. I would hope that we would be able to pursue something like that and not score it very low because there's not a lot of jobs. So just, I'm asking, as we think about that, we just allow for some leniency in that area.
I would agree, but I think if we're going to make somebody put forth the effort to score their project, that we should have a rational basis for why they need to put a score down.
Just for point of clarification, just so I understand, Skip, obviously, we have to make a recommendation on the policy. Let's assume the policy is approved. Does the application have to be approved by the commission and the council if it's ever to be amended? If the staff a month from now says, oh yeah, we need to add in some other non-job related factors that we think are relevant, can the city do that on its own with internal approval, or does that form have to be sent back up through the normal
Absolutely,
chain of?
Commissioner.
Oh,
The staff cannot just arbitrarily change a policy.
not arbitrarily, but would any change have to go through this commission and the city council?
Correct, Commissioner.
It would.
To address your question, I also noticed that the policy currently does allow for projects that do not have job creation, provided they provide some sort of benefit to the city. So it has some language, it's got 2 additional paragraphs that I think would address your issue if this development tool subsidy policy was approved.
So we have a motion, we have a second,
Correct, Mr. Chair.
and can we take a vote at this time? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign.
Thank you, Commissioners. The last policy proposal is also a draft. This is for a renovation grant. Basically, we would be looking at this as an attraction tool, an expansion tool, and a possible renovation tool. As the policy is drafted, if you are a new business seeking to move to Burnsville and you would like to have assistance on some sort of renovation that you're doing, you would need at least 10 employees, 5 of which would have some sort of post-secondary degree. To put the 10 employees in perspective, about 75% of the current companies in Burnsville have less than 10 employees. If you're an existing business and you are looking to do some sort of expansion, the policy is saying that you would need to add 5 employees, and half of those, so 3 in the case of it's just 5, would need to have post-secondary, some sort of post-secondary certification or degree. If you were looking to do a renovation of a building, you would have at least 10 employees, half of which would have post-secondary degrees. The proposal in the draft is that the renovation could be up to $10,000 in funds with a 2-to-1 match. So that means we would be looking at a cost expenditure of at least $30,000 for the full $10,000 grant. So again, build out for a new business, expansion of a current business, renovation of possibly a freestanding building. As in a couple of the previous policies, this again would need a funding source. Again, at the work session, council consensus was to adopt it with council members Coughlin and Schultz not supporting this policy. And once again, Mr. Chair, I'd stand for questions and a recommendation.
Questions?
My only question loops back to previously, we talked a little bit about the strip center redevelopment, and realistically, the only incentive for them that the city would be out there to offer that would be viable would be to completely redevelop the site to something else. I notice it specifically includes or excludes retail businesses from this program.
That's correct, Commissioner.
And it would be my recommendation that that the city council consider or to remove that number 4, that retail businesses would not be eligible for the program. Unless, is there a specific gain that we were looking for by excluding retail businesses and not including them in this renovation fund?
Typically, Commissioner, even with TIF and tax abatement, we have never incented retail businesses. There is only one that I'm aware of that we've ever incented, and that was Red Lion Liquor. And they were kind of caught in the heart of the city redevelopment, so they did get it. But again, your recommendation, if the EDC wishes to do that, is a recommendation that can be passed on the council.
I just look at, we spend a lot of time talking about what to do with our retail corridor, and then to specifically exclude them seems a little counterproductive to some of our other discussions that we've had.
I agree. I can't imagine why they're excluded, unless council has a good reason.
I would believe, Commissioner, that typically we've excluded retail because, again, they are typically not high-paying jobs.
The other consideration on this it specified the type of education that people had to have?
That's correct. Well, it specifies that you need some of your employees to have post-secondary education.
And that, in theory, ties it to a higher wage rate. Is that?
Correct, Commissioner.
Any other questions?
Do you know what the objections were from Commissioner or Council members Coughlin and Schultz?
Absolutely, Commissioner. Their objections are, they're not going to vote for a tax increase to fund this. So
They just
there
took
may
it
be
off.
somewhat siding with a couple of commissioners who say, let's not even have a policy.
I noticed the retail business item wasn't in the demolition policy. Does that mean that business that wants to set up a retail store could be eligible for demolition money if they want to, tear down an old building, put up a new something or other?
Correct, Commissioner. They could be eligible. It still will be up to council to make the
Yeah,
final
there's
decision.
just no explicit
Yes.
restriction on that
Correct.
one. Is there a reason that there isn't a restriction on that one, but there is on this one for retail businesses?
I think the reason is there's an assumption, and it could be wrong at the staff level, that if someone is demoing a retail center, it's unlikely they're going to build a new retail center. And in most cases, if they're going to demo a retail center and build a new one, we'd probably then say you should take a look at our TIF policy, because that's probably going to actually be
More
a better,
valuable.
more valuable, better payout for you.
Then I guess to be consistent with the other recommendation, there's a scorecard here, but there's no guidance on what the score means. We should probably have guidance and a threshold for consideration in the future on this as well.
I oppose it just because the funding source hasn't been identified.
This policy is interesting to me in that, as commercial real estate goes, $30,000 doesn't go very far. And with us talking about it, just applying to companies with 10 employees or more, it seems to me that companies with 10 employees or more, typically $30,000 means even less to them. Certainly the $10,000 just to do the paperwork and so forth to pursue it is really marginal. Where if you were a small company, a small business person trying to get going, and less than 5 employees, that $30,000 or the $10,000 grant potential is pretty significant to you. So just the policy itself seems to me pretty ineffective with who we're targeting. But maybe I'm wrong. It feels like it should be really targeted more towards that entrepreneurial type situation, the more the startup type or the young company situation versus somebody that has 10 employees or more, which typically implies they've been established for a little bit.
I don't disagree, Commissioner.
What'd you say was the percentage of businesses that had less than 10?
About 75% of our businesses have 10 or less.
Yeah, I think if you're gonna get serious about development, you need to have a much higher threshold, a suit that'll fit.
Any recommendation on what that looks like?
Yeah, probably 10 times this amount, 100,000. I mean, to get, I'm not saying everyone gets 100,000, but if you want a big development, I'm talking 50-plus people and wanting to get their attention. And they're doing a $10 million development. To put $10,000 on the table is just, it restrains city. If you're serious, I'm talking about what's going on in Richfield, the rebirth of an entire city requires serious financial resources. Otherwise, you're going to become a second or third tier city. So you need some game.
Maybe I misunderstood the question. Were you referring to the amount of money or the threshold for employees? I thought your take was it was more targeted for small businesses.
This one is.
They're only gonna
like-
have a few.
Well, so I'm questioning the policy as a whole and how, based upon the definition of it and the number of employees and the amount, it just seems to be a discorrelation to me. And it doesn't seem to be targeting the people that we really want to target, which to me, with a small grant like this, and I think in the world of business, $10,000 is a small grant number. I think that it really targets the entrepreneurial environment, which is what we want to encourage certainly as well with a small grant policy. And because those small companies and the entrepreneurs are going to be hopefully the medium-sized companies of the future. And so I'm just questioning if this is really positioned properly for what we hope to achieve. I mean, just a single-stall bathroom in a commercial environment, just one single-stall bathroom is usually $15,000. So it doesn't, I mean, $10,000 doesn't go very far.
Yeah, I guess, to kind of counter on the, I also don't want this to become a massive
Yeah, I get it.
funding source. So I think there needs to be a balance of giving small businesses some support, but recognizing that the city can't be their full source for it. I was gonna suggest that I'm not sure if the employee counts are commensurate. I mean, if you're in a small business, you're just not gonna have, I don't know how you're gonna be able to guarantee that you're gonna add a minimum of 5 employees after getting $20,000 in renovations. You're not gonna put in a couple of new bathroom stalls and then say, yeah, we're gonna hire 5 more people. So I don't know if those thresholds I think those thresholds might be too high to really give some of the entrepreneurs the support that the city's looking to provide. So I guess you can kind of look at it both ways to try to balance out.
You're saying at this amount of money, we should reduce the number of people required.
Yeah,
Number of
that's
employees
kind of the crux of it, that
required.
if we're trying to target this policy towards very small businesses to help them grow, I don't know if the threshold, if the criteria might be too difficult for anyone to really take advantage of the grant.
I would agree, and I think that if you were going to have more money, I mean, if you were going to go up to 100,000, then that could be at a threshold of a certain number of people, and the less amount of money could be a threshold for, I mean, there could be a
tiering,
ladder,
right, that's
tier,
what I-
whatever.
I'm comfortable leaving this as a small grant policy and not making it a massive grant policy
we're
just
not-
quite yet.
Let's try it.
But so yeah, that's why I was focusing more on supporting very small businesses at this point. I don't disagree with coming up with other economic development tools for larger business redevelopment, but I think it's worthwhile to focus on small business perspective, at least for this one.
So would you cut those numbers in half then? Is that what you're proposing, or
I mean,
eliminate them?
I
or-
didn't, I guess Skip will kind of defer to you. I don't know what metrics were used to come up with the 10 and the 5, and so I don't want to.
Well, you said most of the small firms are less than 10 already.
From a staff perspective, Commissioner, I think what we were looking at is we did not think that council would be comfortable incentivizing a company of 2 people moving to Burnsville. So is 10 a reach? Absolutely, it's a reach. There's no question about it. That's kind of where I think staff was looking at. So what we're looking at potentially is a company who possibly has a space in Burnsville and a space in another close city. And possibly the space in Burnsville needs a little bit more work, and we're gonna give them a little bit of help to make that so that they choose Burnsville. Is it a cure-all for everything? No, it is not.
Yeah, it's just interesting that, for this one, we're putting in higher thresholds to even be eligible, but for other policies, there is no threshold, and either way, to your point, either way, it all goes to the Economic Development Commission and the council anyway. Whether you make these
Correct, for
thresholds
final
10
approval.
employees or 5 employees, either way. So someone has a legitimate basis to seek the grant. Is it worth keeping higher criteria to even be eligible, or should we lower them and then be able to get them through to the
Again,
council? That's
council
where-
is looking for the Economic Development Commission's recommendations.
But to your point, city would probably be implementing this. So is it your mind that this is the sweet spot that city would like? I mean, to your point, I can understand why you don't want to incentivize and really take a lot of time with moving 2 people, That's a very expensive, I mean, it takes time and energy to have this conversation and really to get 2 people over. It's not a big win, okay? So that's what I think the council is trying to understand. Where do you see the sweet spot? And if this is it, then I'd say, why don't we give them a try, let it try a year, see what happens. A year from now, we'll figure out next steps.
From a staff perspective, commissioners, I believe what we are attempting to accomplish is to actually get some tools started. And staff has tried to come up with drafts that they hopefully would be acceptable to the city council. Larger numbers may or may not be acceptable to the city council. We have a couple policies that we're already at 4-1 and 3-2 on a possible adoption of a policy, because a couple of council members, very similar to yourself, Commissioner, have said, I'm probably not going to want to fund this, so why should I vote for the policy? Is it a perfect policy? No, I don't believe it is. I believe it's a step to attempt to get beyond what right now is a set of tools that only work in limited capacities.
I'm assuming this policy came from somewhere else, some other source. Is that correct? Is it coming from another city?
No, actually, this policy is a takeoff on a policy that the Economic Development Commission recommended adopting a few years ago, directed strictly at STEM-based businesses. And that policy did not get adopted by council. And staff took that policy and recrafted it beyond just STEM businesses. So did we go to another city? No, we did not. We basically took a policy that we had on the table a couple of years ago that did not get adopted and said, maybe if we adjusted it a little bit.
I'd like to adopt, I'd suggest you keep the policy as simple as you can. So the education requirement, that's why I was fighting, I'm going, why do we care? I mean, if you don't have an education, but he's an IT wizard, and he didn't go to college, he's making 150, I go, I'm not so sure that's, what I want to do, if we can get this passed and through, at least test drive it, and to have as few constraints on it as possible. because that'll give you the highest likelihood of implementation. And so even the 10 I can understand, I'm okay with having 10 employees, but I don't think there should be an education requirement. That's my proposal.
Well, Dan and David, you guys have talked in similar realms. Do you guys want to form a motion, one of you?
Can I have one question first? As a side note, we've been talking for years about how to have some tools for economic development here in the city. And I think that the staff has done a great job in coming up with these policies. This is a start. It's going to have to be funded some way if we want to have the city have these tools. So I like this policy, but I think we should reduce the numbers. And maybe the wording could, I like the education thing, I like the higher paying jobs, trying to have like some support staff and some higher paying jobs. Maybe we say 6 people, ideally 3 with higher education or something. Like use the word ideally instead of have to be. So that when it could get to council and they could make a determination based on if what the people are at the time.
If I could make a suggestion, Mr. Chair, we may be able to accomplish what I think some of you are looking to accomplish by adding some sort of a clause, and we'd ask our EDA attorney for some help with this, that would allow, at council discretion, them to do something different than specifically what is listed in the policy, which they do have that ability in our tax abatement policy. They can abate more than it's called for in the policy if they so wish, because a specific development for whatever reason is something that we're looking for. We may be able to accomplish what everybody's
Well,
asking for by adding a clause like that.
on that note, it maybe not solely to education, but also wage.
Right, if you're
To your
trying to do a
point.
wage, why don't you just state wage instead of education?
Can we make these policies uniform with the other policies in place where they say creation of jobs that pay wages adequate to support households and job retention, rather than post-secondary?
That'd be my preference, is have some guidelines and not rules. That's, because if you have a rule, you go, yep, we have 9 people and only 3 with education degrees. Bummer, you don't qualify. It's like, what? Who wrote that rule? I mean, you should have some discretion, and I agree with Commissioner's preference for good paying jobs.
So let's see if we can try to assemble the motion here, I guess. So we have, I'd make a motion to approve the draft renovation grant policy.
Mr.
Provided-
Chair, if I could interrupt.
Yeah.
This body does not have the ability to approve, you only have the ability to recommend. So you'd need to state the
Okay.
motion as you'd recommend.
Well, okay, sorry. I would motion to recommend to city council the approval of the draft renovation grant policy with the insertion of a paragraph to allow the city council discretion based on awarding the policy, awarding the grants, with consideration thresholds added to the scorecard. And we suggest lowering the amount of jobs to be created in both categories of new business and existing businesses as stated in the policy.
Can I make a tweak?
Amendment, please.
Only because, no, only because the council will already have discretion on the award. The issue we're talking about is eligibility to even pursue it to begin with. So is and this, I think is what Skip you're referring to. The amendment would be to insert a clause that gives the city discretion in determining eligibility to pursue, to seek a grant? Is that permissible, or we don't know yet? Gotta ask the lawyers.
Commissioner, the Economic Development Commission can obviously make any recommendation you so desire.
Let's go. Really?
Okay, then.
A few other things I'd like to add.
Do we want to reduce it to 5? Is that what you're getting it? Because we need to make a recommendation. We can't just
number.
say, we gotta, because they put 10. So do we want to reduce it to 5?
So is it 5 and 2? I mean, and then give them, so 5 and 2, and we have the scorecard thresholds, but then they would have the ability to vary outside of the threshold if they so chose? Is that,
And I'm proposing we eliminate the education in light of the language about,
but we're retaining the wage portion?
right.
I think we got it.
What he just said. Can somebody summarize that, please?
I think we got it.
What does the scorecard measure? Remind me again.
Well, again, we have an application here that has a scoring system that appears as though it has no relevance on the rest of it, so I think there needs to be a minimum eligibility threshold based on the scorecard. Otherwise, we just don't have them fill out a scorecard if it matters to no one. So does anybody want to just remove the scoring system altogether, or should we have some sort of reason for them filling out the scoring system?
Now, I would look to city, if they want to have a scoring system, they think it's helpful, do the scoring system, simply add some consequence to it, to your point. If the city thinks it's futile, doesn't offer any insight, then get rid of it. Skip, do you have any initial thoughts on that? On the importance of the scorecard?
Commissioner, I believe that there is some importance to the scoring in that it at least gives some frame of reference. Typically, right now, the only thing we can relate to is our TIF and tax abatement
Yes.
policies.
And that's an
Typic-
effective process. in TIF and
typically-
TAF.
Typically, the score is not something that council or EDA pays a tremendous amount of attention to the score. They're more looking at, is it allowable? Is it qualified? Did it pass the but-for test? As in, if we don't get the money, we can't do the development. The scoring is somewhat of a process for the developer to be able to explain to us kind of the whole realm of what they're looking to do. We have never wanted to give a developer the idea that if you get a certain score, it's an automatic guarantee you're gonna get this money. Because there are no automatic guarantees until council approves it.
Right, I think we were discussing eligibility versus, guarantee of the grant.
But I hear you saying it forces the developer to give you a much better framework. You get additional insights by having them do the questionnaire.
That would be correct, Commissioner.
Or have them fill it out so that they meet the point eligibility threshold.
So in these cases, the score is more subjective to city council to say, if you got a score, as you can see on this worksheet, ratio of public versus private, there's 1 to 5. It's looking like the score is, if they get a 3, it's more of a subjective, where city council can now pursue and look more in depth on whether that meets a qualification for the grant. That's what I'm
And
assuming
again,
that what it
Commissioner,
means.
the score typically, with the councils over the last 3 years, the score is not something that they get fixated on. In many cases, the scoring in the application is something, as staff has discussion with developers, it gives us a frame of reference of what this development is really looking at. But again, we are patterning this scoring after our current TIF and tax abatement. They may not be totally adaptable to this, and that may be a growing process that we look at as we go through. But council is typically a little more comfortable if they've got a complete story from an applicant as to the whats and whys and wherefores.
Right, no, okay. So based on that and the score seeming to be relatively, irrelevant to the rest of the process, I guess I would propose removing the score altogether, retaining the questionnaire, providing the city council discretion in eligibility for the grant funds, and reducing the employees, the job creation number to 5 for new businesses and 2 for existing businesses, and removing the post-secondary education component.
But adding that wording that Eric said.
You know, and adding the wording back into, it's a equal wage to whatever the city said, I can't remember what it said.
Is there a reference for the paragraph, so we can just reference the paragraph?
I can craft that for you, Commissioner.
I think it's just,
I believe the intent is to, in place of the education requirement, put in the
living
statement,
wage,
the
right.
living wage statement.
living wage scenario, yes.
Yep, similar to the demolition policy.
Do we have a second,
I'll second.
Sandra? Any further discussion?
Yeah, I don't mean to belabor the point, but this whole total score versus no score, if it's already used on a bunch of other forms that the city uses, I think it's just kind of goofy to say that this one's just, we're not gonna do it, but for all the other ones. Now, I know the city can reject it, but I don't see, if it's gonna serve as a point of reference for the city and the city staff uses it as some type of general guide, at the very least, just be a threshold. I just don't know if it's worth removing, but that's a minor point.
I guess what I'm going at is it's some sort of a frame of reference, but the individual filling out the form has no idea exactly what that frame of reference is. And I think if it's going to be used as some sort of reference, there should be something as far as a threshold on there. But if it's not really used or nobody pays attention to it, then I don't see sense in putting the person through the exercise.
Is it,
But city already stated the importance of it, gives them a larger framework.
did you,
I guess I don't
It
know
has-
how it does. If I just get a score, if I score a 75 on something,
No,
What is-
it's the process of itemizing and giving a framework for, it forces the developer to answer these questions, and it gives the city a chance to understand the fullness, and the breadth of the
right.
project.
I didn't propose removing the application, just the scores.
you were removing the threshold of a score, a certain score, right?
No, I was
there wouldn't be a score.
removing the
We're
score
deleting-
altogether.
You take out the whole
Deleting
sheet.
the
is what it
points
was.
Just leaving the worksheet.
Deleting the
Removing the
points.
worksheet and removing the score, because the score doesn't seem to have any benefit. At least if I were to look at this as a business coming in and I put a score down, I would assume the score meant something.
Are there applicants seeking TIF financing that are refusing to fill out the form because they don't understand what the points mean?
No, Commissioner.
Right, do we have any reason, has anyone ever approached you, a business, an applicant, inquiring about these points and what it means, and what if they get an 82 versus 63?
No, Commissioner.
So I guess,
The only difference between this worksheet total score and the tax abatement total score is that tax abatement tells you what level of years of abatement you can be eligible for. This one doesn't give you any eligibility.
I guess I just defer more to staff in terms of what they want in a form to drive their decision-making as, and recommendations to the commission and the council. But that's,
I'm okay with the worksheet as it is. Let them score it.
Me too.
I was,
Yeah,
So maybe we need
so
to
is there an
vote
amendment to
first
the
Yeah,
motion?
on,
that's about to ask.
let's have a vote first on if we're gonna include the worksheet or not in our policy.
Well, there's a motion, so I think we need
Right.
an amendment to the motion. And so if somebody wants to propose the amendment, or
Okay.
do I propose my own amendment?
You certainly can.
Okay, so the amendment would be, the amendment to the motion on the floor would be to remove the portion of the motion that would seek to remove the scoring from the worksheet.
Second.
I have that, I believe I have your intent. Mr. Chair, actually, Commissioner Copeland, who seconded the motion, needs to second the amendment.
Right.
I'll second it.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign? All right, thank you.
Commissioners. Now that we've gotten through the easy parts, the question that everyone has been alluding to, as I have stated, that at the work session, there was council consensus on adoption of the 3 amended policies and the 2 drafts with some difference in voting. There was no discussion at that point in time in the funding of any of these that necessitate funding. There is one option of funding, and it's an option that many of our market cities use, and that is an increase in the EDA levy, whether that be a gradual increase or the maximum EDA levy. This year, if you did max EDA levy, you would be looking at somewhere between $400,000 and $500,000 increase. As I mentioned, staff did in September, or I'm sorry, council in September, did include an additional $75,000 in the EDA that could be used for some future type of need. The options that exist is some sort of gradual increase in the EDA levy and creating an economic development fund to fund all these different policies that need funding. A movement immediately in 2019 to the max EDA levy and a continuation of that to fund, put into an economic fund, or any other funding option that the Economic Development Commission might consider. An increase in the sales tax, anything like that. I think council is looking for some ideas of how they could go about funding this. And as you know, our council typically is not in favor of dramatic increases in taxes.
So I have an off-the-wall brainstorming idea, and under rules of brainstorming, there are no bad ideas. So I was reading an article recently about a software program, and don't ask me to remember the name of the program, but it was designed to help with microfinancing. Everybody's familiar with microfinancing that's going on throughout the world, but for school systems, and where teachers can take a project and they can put it out there and achieve financing for that project. And what a great idea. I think about something like that for what we're talking about here. I wonder if we could put something, it would have to be a stated specific project and amount. I wonder if there's a tool out there that would allow us to try to do some microfinancing, even if it's amongst the Burnsville residents. And if we have 60+ thousand residents, and you say there's 20,000 households, 20,000 times $10 is $200,000. So, I just kind of wonder if something like that would ever be a tool that we could consider, because I think there would be a lot of people that love to throw in 10, 20, 30 bucks to kind of help with something that's going to help Burnsville be better.
You're saying toward a specific project, or?
I think it could be a specific project or a specific master plan perhaps, or something for redevelopment. I don't know. Like I said, it's a brainstorming idea, so no bad ideas.
We have to fund demolition fund, renovation grant fund, and whatever the new business subsidy, development tools.
Your land assembly, Commissioner.
Land assembly, that's right.
And again, you could create an economic development fund that any of those could draw from. They may not all be used in any given year on any given projects.
And has there been any analysis by staff about how much money would reasonably fund these types of of initiatives based on business outreach and questions of seeking these types of resources, even though I know up until right now, they weren't available.
I would not go so far, Commissioners, to say that there's been staff analysis. I think if you look at some of the cost of some of these things we've talked about, building demolition is probably gonna run anywhere from $75,000 to maybe $150,000 for a building demolition. Land assembly, we're probably talking $500,000 to $1 million plus. If you look at all of those, the quickest way to get to an ability to be able to do some of those would obviously be maximum EDA levy. I do not think our political climate would allow for maximum EDA levy. So I think what I think what council would be looking for is, does the EDC have any recommendations of some other farm, whether it be a gradual increase, whether it be something totally unique, as Commissioner LaFave has proposed?
What are the available, you mentioned sales tax, real estate tax. Are there other sources of revenues outside of inventing one? Are those the two principal?
There
Obviously,
are no, well, another source of revenue that we have used is competitive grants.
One question I have with this fund, in any given, budget year, if funds are not used, are those left in the fund and available for use in following years, or are those cleared out and put into other funds they go into the general fund or something like that if they're not utilized in the budget year?
Commissioner, the answer to that question would be, I think council would look for a recommendation from the EDC Commission as to how you would use those funds. From staff's perspective, if we created an economic development fund and any unused funds in a given year stayed in the economic development fund for use in future years, that would allow us possibly to have that fund grow over time, similar to our infrastructure trust fund that we have for street rehabilitation.
How does it function currently, do you know?
I'm sorry, Commissioner.
How does that fund function currently?
We do not have an EDA fund like that right now.
But we have a levy of some sort, correct? Of some sort, okay.
The current EDA levy pays for current expenses. My
Okay.
salary, my benefits,
The
greater
department in
MSP
general, yep.
investment, open to business investment, our Economic Development Association dues, our MinCard dues, those sorts of things.
Okay, I guess that would be my first recommendation then, that the city establish a fund that we could carry over the remaining balances, should there be any, into following years to allow that pool of money to grow over time.
So you moved for the easy thing. Second.
Well, right. I mean, well, if we need to make that recommendation, we should just get that out and make sure we hit it.
Do we need a motion?
I mean, I'm not intending to close the entire discussion.
No.
I think that's the motion. I think if we add a number with that motion, I think that would be the full motion. I'm assuming if you are proposing the creation of a fund, you're also going to support some amount of money to include in said fund, right? I would hope.
Logically, we're going to
Otherwise,
need some.
there's nothing to carry over.
Well, and then we need some sort of money in there. Otherwise, all of the other motions that we made tonight would
I will
not
start.
have
I will throw out. The max is, if I understood it, Skip, was 500. When you said 400,000 to 500,000 is available.
additional.
Yeah, that's additional available.
That would have been for 2018. It'd probably be about the same 2019. But for 2018, the max tax has already been passed.
Right. So this is for. So what we'd be proposing is going to be for
2019.
2019.
Correct,
But you said that there was 75,000.
correct, Commissioner.
So we need to start this fund, put the 75,000 in there, and how are we gonna handle this fund? Is this gonna be a carryover fund or
Right.
what? I'd like to address the sales tax issue. I think that most of the businesses in Burnsville would be out protesting if we started adding to a sales tax. They don't like it. It increases the amount that they have to spend on goods, and people will go to the next city over to buy them instead.
That's why I
Restaurants,
asked,
everything.
Are there any other places? You know, we're pretty much stuck with the levy. As the current, in our current configuration, unless we dream up some other surtax we do for businesses, which would be, just be clumsy and,
They're really hard to monitor and collect.
yeah, it'd just be.
So I have 3 ideas I'm going to throw out. I'm still in brainstorming
None of
mode.
them are bad.
They're all bad. So one would be on the sale, and I'll throw out all 3 and then maybe have staff address them. One would be, could we take the sale of existing city-owned properties and those funds and put it into this fund?
Yes.
The second one would be, in the world of incremental tax creation, if we were to grant 50% back to the developer, could we tie the other 50%, or whatever that number is, into this fund? The third idea, so in other words, we
Give
give,
an example.
let's say the tax increment created is a additional tax of $50,000 a year. And we decide that we're going to
Okay.
give the developer 25% or 50% tax increment, so $25,000 of that $50,000 incremental tax increase.
We certainly could do that, Commissioner. That would only apply in the case of a TIF or a tax abatement.
Yeah.
And that would be less than we now typically would give,
And typically we give what? What percent?
75 to 100%.
Okay, so say it's 75%. And again, we would have that, the city would have, staff would have to have that discretion, whether it's 75 or 80 or 100, whatever. But to the extent that we're not giving 100%, could we tie what's remaining to this fund? That's my second thought. Now, my last thought is, right now, when a developer does a project, there is a sewer access charge, there is a water access charge, and specific to the city, there's a park dedication fee. Could we come up with a fee that's not too onerous, that then ties back into our EDA fund, or this fund that we're talking about? So those are my 3 brainstorming ideas.
I really like taking money out of the proceeds from land sales. Where do those proceeds usually go anyway? Are they go to the general fund usually, or?
Right now, by policy, they basically go into the general fund.
Okay.
There's certainly absolutely nothing wrong with that suggestion. I would only remind you that the city only owns a limited amount
Say
of
we
land to
don't
sell.
have much.
But again, we're talking on $500,000 to get started, whatever. I'm guessing those, a couple of those properties might achieve that. I don't know.
Seed money?
We don't.
Yes, they would, Commissioner.
What's the practicality of his second idea of earmarking the unused TIF money? If we only give 75%, if we swing the other 25%?
By the time we take out the state's cut, the administrative cut and everything else, very limited.
Okay.
Could we implement like a membership fee? I know other cities do like a economic development membership fee for businesses that come in and are awarded tax abatements.
We could certainly do any
I don't know
of
what the
that.
details behind it are, but I know other cities have some type of,
To put it in reference,
like a business
we've
member.
only given tax abatement to one business. And I'm sorry, Commissioner LaFave, the other one you had, for lack of a better terminology, I would call some sort of additional developer fee.
Yeah, it'd be,
That-
you know,
that-
like right now, there's a park dedication fee.
Yeah, that, certainly that can be a recommendation. Again, it's only gonna happen when there's new development.
Yep, I get it.
And not all new development pays park dedication, because in many cases, the park dedication has already been paid. It's not it only gets paid once.
Yep.
You mean per property?
Yes.
Okay.
And I will tell you that if you go in and buy a piece of property in Burnsville, and you're looking to do a development, and for some reason, and this has happened in a number of cases, for some reason, years ago when the first development occurred, for some reason, we did not collect the park dedication, that's usually quite a surprise to the developer, and that's usually considered all of a sudden a whole additional extra cost to do that development. And in some cases, it has been a significant number.
What about, what do you guys charge for a permit, to pull a permit?
Depends on the permit.
What's the range?
Again, it depends on, I mean, we have.
Well, okay, I'm
Depends on
thinking
the
of doing a surcharge on permits. What I'm trying to figure out is activity that's development oriented, and pulling a permit is one. It's very similar to car tabs. You drive a car, you pay your tab. It's just the way you pay your tax. That could be, so if we want to line this tax closest to the activity it's engendering, I like your idea of a new development fee, but we don't have, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of pass-through. So I'm thinking of other ways where you have simple pass-throughs, even $3 for every permit, or a percent, 10% on all permits. We just raised our permit expense. I have no idea if that puts us in an uncompetitive situation, but if you have to pull a permit to put a deck on the back of your house, if it's $180 or $190, you're gonna pay the permit, because you're not gonna move to Prior Lake because the permit costs $10 more, you know? So I'm trying to, and if you go, oh, we do 5, or 1,000 permits a year, you go, at $10 each, now I got $10,000, so.
Where are we at with franchise fees on our community versus surrounding communities?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, off the top of my head, I would not be adequately be able to respond to that question.
All right, well, two thoughts. One, they're probably gonna be, I'm gonna be in an island here, but I wouldn't be 100% opposed to some sort of CI-based property tax increase to fund the development just to get it started. We have to do something to get it started, and that's gonna increase the CI-based property values directly if there's redevelopment that happens, especially surrounding their properties and creating less excess land available or high-density use,
CI means,
commercial industrial.
so you don't want to tax commercial industrial?
No, I do.
Oh, you do, okay.
More.
I mean, it's gonna be a nominal amount. I mean, if you're talking $400,000 or $500,000, I don't know what the net is to the city
I
right now
agree.
on that. Do you know, I assume you don't know that off the top of your head, what the net CI base is?
I do not, Commissioner, off the top of my head. And if I'm understanding you right, you're asking for a property tax only on commercial property, not on
I'm just throwing out an
residential?
idea there, or doing it residential. Without knowing the net impact, it's hard to make any sort of recommendation in my position.
I guess if that would be the case, I would be more inclined to spread it out over the entire tax base. I'm less inclined to support a development fee if the action that we're trying to incent is further development, to then turn around and give them an additional cost of their initial outlay. It seems a little counterproductive. So I think I would agree, but what is that number?
I can tell you, Commissioners, that based on the fact that residential property is increasing faster than commercial property, the tax levy this year will have minimal impact on commercial property versus residential. Now, a few years ago, that was flipped. It was the other way around. So there is some tie-in on the property values.
Do you have an estimate of what the property tax increase will be?
Off the top of my head, Commissioner, I can't respond to that question.
Any questions, thoughts at this point?
Well, my hope is that we could make a recommendation of the amount of funding, because of the political reality of, I mean, I'd love to fund it with, 300,000 or 400,000 to start. That may not be politically viable, given what our city is indicating. But it'd be wonderful if we could put together a list, at least, of viable options. I think we put 4 of them out there, and suggest that they consider each one of them. We'd have to have city flesh them out, what they mean in terms of possible ranges, like the sale of the land. I mean, that's gonna be a wild range, but that's a no tax increase, and it just goes into general fund. So I have to imagine that'd be most amenable. But if we're gonna get serious about developing, we may have to consider a fee or some sort of taxation.
What are you looking for from us on this funding thing? Just ideas, or do we have to make a recommendation?
Commissioner, the body can do whatever they want.
Rather
A
not make
recommendation is always nicely
Okay.
acceptable.
Well, I would
But
think that,
certainly, if you wish to put forth the 3 or 4 topics that you've discussed and let council move forward or look at them, review them, think about them, that can certainly also happen.
Would it be worthwhile to propose an increase in the levy right now of a certain number that we're comfortable with the recommendation that staff evaluate the alternative?
I don't like the
Sources.
idea of proposing an increase in the levy. To me, that's the easy way out. And I think that if we get creative, there's got to be another way that doesn't increase taxes, but yet puts the burden on the people that are going to benefit directly.
Yep, I don't disagree. It's just levy, there's more certainty
I
of
know.
understanding what the number is gonna be. And so I'm trying to kind of find a middle ground where we know there's gonna be a dedicated source, we know how much it's gonna be, but we want the fund to eventually be, funded more with these alternative methods. My concern is I just don't know what the number is gonna be. It could be a lot, it could be a little, I just don't know. I don't think anybody knows at this point. But I think we want to propose that staff evaluate it and they go that way.
Okay, so let's think about strategically. Where do you want to land 3 to 4 years from now? Okay, what I'm saying is, if we're gonna do serious development, any one of these projects, if we're gonna do the land, I mean, you gotta have at least $500,000. I mean, if you don't have what kind of land you buying, or, I mean, and if we're gonna do these demolition projects at $100,000 a pop, we have to come up with some serious money. And I see, at the very least, is $500,000. I mean, and the sooner we can get there, the better. And if it has to be via the levy, I say, every other county, every other city is doing this. The longer we wait, the further behind we get competitively, and the more age in our city becomes.
What if we look at it as if we have a goal in 3, 4 years, a goal amount, and however way we get about there is what we recommend. If property, selling the property, proceeds from the property gets us this much closer, then everything else is filled by the levy. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So what is that magic number? And you said, you threw out there 500,000, right?
A year, right,
A year? for
at
the next-
least, yes.
Okay.
And I would recommend the council get there as soon as they can. I mean, within 2 to 3 years. If they can't bite off $100,000 this year, it's embarrassing. I mean, they gotta make a step. Either that or you're just gonna let everyone else outcompete us. So we gotta, and it gives the city a chance to start to walk, run, you know? You gotta start crawling. We're not even crawling yet. So you gotta give the city some money to work with so they can learn something. If you don't give them any money to work with, 2 years from now, we'll be sitting around this table going, well, what's worked? Nothing. We've tried nothing. So I see it as experiment. I agree, some's gonna work, some's not, but at least we'll learn. So that 3 years from now, we'll look back and say, yep, we tried that, we spent 100,000, we learned something. And that's the biggest, what I see this early seed money starting to do, is a learning process and give city a chance to go and implement some of these great ideas they've already approved.
So I agree with you, $500,000 a year probably sounds, for a start, a good start place, and realistic to try to do some things on a small scale. I think the land sale, the existing property sales going into this to help is probably least painful, but it's not immediate either, and I understand that. The levy would probably not be immediate, because there's a lot of loopholes to run through on that, but it also seems, as I said earlier, it feels like that's the easy way out to some degree. I'm kind of intrigued, staff said something about that the park dedication fee only gets paid once. But yet in light of that, we have a 2040 plan that we just completed. And that part of the 2040 plan is to try to connect at least our community parks, which are, there are 20, I believe, in the city, our community parks with a trail system, so they're all connected. And so that we can be more live, work, play, and for the younger communities, for bikeable and walkable and so forth. In order for that to happen, there's gonna be a discussion somewhere in the city about funding additional things for this connectivity that we desire as a city. I really wonder if we could tie a park dedication fee back somehow, and then tie that also with making a park dedication fee which includes a component for economic development. Because a business coming into the city that now has a fee for the trail system, which ultimately helps their employees, help them recruit employees into the community, and tied to redevelopment of a community, an older community, to me, that feels like a bit of a win for those that are coming in new. So I would like to give some thought to that.
We can certainly make that recommendation, Commissioner. Again, park dedication is a one-time only. All the properties that are paid are paid.
I know, but I'm saying on new communities, new developments, if I'm hearing you correctly, on new developments, they wouldn't necessarily, if that previous property on a redevelopment situation had paid a park dedication fee, the new development potentially does not, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is, I think we should rethink that on a bigger picture. I know that's a little bit outside of the scope, but it ties back in, because there's an opportunity to potentially look at a new fee that maybe we become part of that fee as well.
Again, the Economic Development Commission can make any recommendation. I'm not certain, Commissioner, that would be legal,
Yeah, I don't know either.
because
that's
you're
above
taking
my
park
scope.
dedication money and using it for something else.
No, I'm not.
Well, maybe
What
you
I was
call it
thinking
economic
is,
development park.
no, you invent a whole new line item. Just called the development fee.
If I could, Commissioners, I believe what I'm hearing is the recommendation would be, if you're going to do a new development, we'll put a fee on that to create a fund to give you money to do redevelopment,
Perfect.
That's
You got it.
exactly.
which means we don't need it.
Right, that's why I guess that's why I think it goes back to, I think at least to get this kicked off, we do have to have some sort of increase in the EDA levy to get it moving, to get it going. And I'm not a huge fan of going all the way to the max, which it appears, 500,000 is the max. We have 75,000 approved for this next calendar or the next budget year.
Commissioner, we have an additional 75 in the budget. It will not be approved until next month, and it may or may not be approved.
Tentatively,
yes.
Okay. I guess to get something started, we need to have, if we're going to have these tools, we need to have some money to actually implement them. And I think if we could start at increasing that amount to $200,000 in the next budget cycle, that would give us the ability to possibly execute some of these tools in that year. And if the fund can carry over in future years as well.
I would suggest we see if that 75 is still available this year.
If council approves the 75 in December, it will be available.
Okay, good. So even if they haven't, so my recommendation is that council approve it even though they haven't identified the purpose, because right now they're debating the purpose of it, okay? They haven't identified it. But they just got done approving 3 things that are unfunded. I go, well, just direct that, at the very least, that's 75. And then 2019, make it 300, and by 2020, at 500. That's my suggestion.
Does someone want to make a formal motion?
Well, I think we should make a list of the things that we're proposing that they look at. So one thing would be the levy. And what amount are we, I've heard 200, I've heard 300 for 19. What do we want to put on that?
250.
I'm hearing the land sale portion or profits to the fund. I'm hearing a permit fee for new building permits.
Yep.
What else were viable options for raising money for this fund?
I think we may have discussed that the permit fee might be counterproductive.
If you put the permit fee on everybody that's adding it, I mean,
No, you were talking about the development fee.
No, I'm
This
talking
is the
about permit.
permit fee,
Building
Permit.
permit.
not the development fee.
building
Yep.
permits.
Building permits, all building permits.
A small fee on all permits.
I'm
I like it.
suggesting a 10%, because he can't give me a price tag on them. I just say everything goes up 10%. All permits. And whatever that shakes out, city can, I mean, just as a starting point, if it's $150, I'm suggesting $15. If it's 3,000, I'm suggesting go to 3,300.
I think it's hard to comment on that without doing the math.
Yeah.
And understanding what that math means. I have no scope. What you're proposing, just raise $1,500 a year, I have no idea
I
what
have
that
no
means.
idea either. Okay, here's what I'm suggesting is, we get to these amounts, 75 this year, 300 next year, and if we can get it through the land sale, we don't do any of the levy increase.
Right.
We got a year to see a land sale. If we have no land sale, I suggest the levy go up nothing. And then, but these would be goals we'd shoot for, and then we'd have to revisit these other, the permitting idea, and at least they have some levers to debate. But it can't be that hard for the city to figure out, I mean, in an afternoon, someone can figure, you can just say, how much was total permits last year? Increase of 10%.
Again, Commissioner, off the top of my head, I could not give you that.
I know, but
Had I had
someone
advanced
could.
knowledge of that question, I certainly would
I don't
have.
think
had it
we
on
need
file.
to,
I'm just
You're
saying.
you're just getting the list of options.
we're just giving them an options to
Right,
look at.
exactly.
We don't have to put prices on stuff. We're saying we agree that there should be an EDA levy. What that is, if it's 50,000, 250,000, 100,000, we agree there should be something, what's the
No,
amount?
I suggest
We're
we
saying
give
we
them a
want to
number.
get to 500.
Right.
In the next 2-3 years, we want to get the fund to 500,000.
So we're proposing
Per year.
the levy.
These ways.
They're proposing the levy
The
we're
levy?
recommending that the council evaluate non-levy ways to fully fund the fund to 500,000 on an annual basis,
Yep.
and to consider in part these options. And there's gonna be a dozen more that are worth considering that we haven't brought up tonight.
Yep, that's right.
So that would be the,
Anything else you want to add to the specific list right now?
It's a good start.
This is a good start.
I think it's a good start. I just don't know if we need to have a goal of having $500,000 worth of money going into the fund every year.
well,
What's your
and it
goal?
might carry over. So we might be at 500,000 because there's been no activity, which would be unfortunate.
So
Raise other
you're,
issues.
so you're saying the goal is to get the fund up to $500,000, not necessarily levy or collect $500,000 every year?
Correct.
Right.
No, I'm
Okay.
suggesting levy 500,000 every year. Because
I think that's too much.
I don't think we're in a position to understand with all the alternatives, how much money should or shouldn't be levied on a go-forward basis multiple years from now. All we can try to do is to say, we want to get, to your point, we want to get this project off the ground. We want to find funds that we are tangible, recommend funds that we know are going to fill the coffers to at least begin the process. But we want to try to evaluate alternative mechanisms to increase the fund. After that, depending on what's implemented, I don't know if we need to levy 500,000 every year. We might not need to.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying to give them a goal of how much to put into the fund, regardless of
Okay.
the sourcing.
Sure,
Yes,
I'll support that. So a goal of funding 500,000 every year,
correct.
going forward every year.
Yes, at the very, to get there, because they're all worried about getting there. I'm saying, well, if nothing else happens, then the levy is the fall gap,
The fallback, yeah.
is the fallback solution. All these other ones are in front of it. That's how I see it.
Anything else?
Do you want to formalize that into a motion?
I've never done that, but I'll give it a whirl here.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, you have a motion on the floor to create an EDA fund. Are you looking to
Right, I'm
amend
sorry,
that
yes,
motion?
I forgot that.
I took the easy one. So I guess we're call for an amendment, I suppose, to the motion?
No,
You want to do that?
we haven't made,
Do you have, does he have to make the amendment since he made the
I
original?
don't have to make the amendment. Somebody else can make the amendment.
Right.
Okay.
Amendment to the motion.
what was the motion? Just
You have a
refresh.
motion on the floor to create an ED fund.
An EDA fund that has a carryover.
Carryover.
That was not in your, in the
That was not
motion.
in-
that's
Okay,
on the
that
floor.
was,
That was our intent.
That was the intent, or that was what I thought I had made the motion.
You want to
of.
restate your motion,
Yeah,
please?
the motion, as intended was that we create an ED fund and any remaining balance at the end of the budget cycle would carry over in the fund to the following years.
Thank you, Commissioner.
And who seconded that?
I don't think you got that far.
It did get that far.
Commissioner Turner, second.
Oh, he did, yeah.
Why not? Oh, yeah, that's right. Easy one. Yeah, yep.
That
All
was
right.
Yesterday that
Yeah,
happened. but-
yeah. Right.
I'd like to make
Feels
an
like it.
amendment to that we recommend that to the council, that we fund or get into the fund $500,000 per year, using various options, an EDA levy with maybe a gradual amount increase if needed, profits from land sales that the city owns, and a permit fee to be determined. We're thinking perhaps 10%, but we don't know what the current fees are.
Do we have a second,
I'll second.
Jeff? Any further discussion? All in favor, signify by aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign.
Aye.
I'm sorry, who cast the,
I get back to I disagree with the amount. I think the 500,000 is a lot. That's just where I go.
That's fine.
okay, I just needed to know.
Yep.
Thank you, Commissioners. We will be on to
moving
your
on.
next item.
Yes, review open business.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A very quick review of the Open to Business program, and I do need to apologize. The numbers for 2017 that you see on your screen are correct numbers. The numbers that were in your background, which were larger numbers, are incorrect. The Open to Business folks have a new way of reporting to the cities the numbers, and I made the misassumption that they were reporting the number of businesses they worked with and the number of residents they worked with, and you add those two numbers together, and that's the total clients. Actually, what they were trying to report was that they were working with a certain amount of businesses, some of whom were also residents. So the addition should not have occurred. So basically, the numbers that you see through 9 months of this year are there's been 14 clients that they have worked with in Burnsville, and there's been 86 clients in Dakota County. I can tell you that, again, so far this year, they have worked with more clients in Burnsville than any other city in Dakota County, although there are a couple of cities equally close to where we are. In general, obviously 86 clients across the county for the year is not a bad thing to do. A couple of things that we have noticed is that of the business clients they work with, approximately half of them, they're assisting them in some sort of new opportunity that they're looking towards getting into. And the other half is they're trying to help them in some sort of challenge that business is expecting to have right now. And then when they're working with a startup, about 70% of those are kind of in that, it should say startup, not stat-up, in that startup phase, and about 30% of those are literally pre-startup. So they're kind of in the, I've got an idea, can you help me? And we just wanted, at this point, to just give you a kind of an update of where we were with that program so far this year. The cost this year of the program was $77.66. It will be approximately that cost next year. It is in the budget for next year. And again, assuming the budget is approved in December, you know, we would continue to move forward with the Open to Business program unless there was a recommendation from EDC to abandon that program at this time.
I don't see any reason to abandon it. It's very economic for $7,000, even if we help 14, it's $500 each.
Are you looking for a motion at all?
We do not need a motion unless for some reason you think we should abandon this program.
I think it's been helpful to people. I've met people that have, you know, vetted their idea through Open to Business, and I think it's been good.
Heard any further discussion, comments, questions? Okay.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Updates?
Your last item is updates, and we do actually have quite a few of them. Probably first and foremost, Council approximately a month ago moved their starting time of their meetings to 5:30 in the evenings. They are looking for input from commissions as to whether or not the commissions would like to also move their start times to 5:30. Whatever they do, they're gonna want to have all the commissions be the same. So all the commissions are gonna meet at 5:30 or they're gonna meet at 6:30. And they're just looking for input from each commission as to which way you would prefer going.
And the reason they want them all the same time is for staff?
Consistency.
I would support moving to 5:30.
I agree. I would support moving to 5:30.
I'm fine with that.
I'm fine with it.
It worked for me.
I can make it work, I guess.
It's the people, it's the commuters that have to worry, so.
I believe I'm hearing consensus for 5:30. Thank you, Commissioners. Just so you're aware, the city of Burnsville did go through a process called the Bloomberg's Mayor's Challenge. It is an opportunity for a city to pick a significant problem and come up with an innovative solution to the problem that could be utilized in other cities. We did make a grant submittal. There's 3 phases of funding. Phase number 1 is $100,000 that would be granted at the beginning of next year, and that would give you 6 months to test your idea. 35 cities will get $100,000. There were over 500 cities that put in grant applications. Out of those 35 cities, once the testing is done, they would then review all of the testing. 4 cities will be given a grant of $1 million, and 1 city will be given a grant of $5 million. The problem was how to assist the Burnsville Center in continuing to be kind of the retail driver in that economic development corridor. And the innovative idea had 3 phases to it. Phase number 1 was to basically do kind of a study design plan of how to renovate the center. The second part of it was to create kind of a outside gathering space, for example, similar to Nicollet Commons Park. And the third part of it was to create what we've referred to as an entrepreneurial zone, where we would assist businesses in paying down the lease to get into the Burnsville Center and basically somewhat guarantee smaller types of retail businesses that typically are not put into regional centers. And that, about 3 weeks ago, the grant went in, and that's just an update as to where we are on that. We had a cross-section of people that worked on that. This morning, we had actually 55 Burnsville High School senior students here at City Hall in a job shadow program. It's part of the Burnsville Promise Initiative to expose the students to the different types of careers that not only exist out there, but also to let them realize there are all kinds of careers in City Hall besides policemen and firemen and people who work in the Parks Department. It appeared to be well accepted by the kids. Some of the feedback was they'd like to see it, done again. The feedback I've gotten so far from our staff that is involved is they did enjoy interacting with the kids, and they thought that the students realized that there's a lot of careers in the city that they may not have thought existed. And I think some of the students also came to realize that there's a lot of careers that your education may not have been directly related to the career you're in, but you got into that career and you're now prospering. We also, about 3 weeks ago, MNCAR, the Association of Commercial Brokers, had their annual expo. We had a booth there, great reception, talked to a lot of the brokers. It's a great time for us to be able to interact with the brokers. I found it interesting, this is the 3rd year we've had a booth there, and I believe the first year we had a booth there were 4 cities that had booths. This year, there were about a dozen cities that had booths. And the feedback I got from the brokers who visited our booth is that they do enjoy the fact that cities are coming out on their turf and meeting with them. The last 3 years, it's been very, very good for us. And again, being there next year is in our budget. If approved, we will probably be there next year. And then one thing I did not include in your background of updates that I should alert you to is, as you all probably know, you get a very small stipend every year to cover printing reimbursement for agendas and everything else you print. Those reimbursements will be coming out probably between now and the end of the year. So you will be, if you see a check from the City of Burnsville, that's what it's for, to help you cover some of your expenses for your agenda printing. Mr. Chair, that's all of the updates unless the commission has questions.
Any questions?
No question, just a quick comment. One thing I would like to see us work on in the future is the idea of an incubator space. In Minneapolis, it might be, this would be certainly on a much smaller scale, but something like a COCO or WeWorks type concept in the city of Burnsville. I think that's something that would fall under our jurisdiction or our thoughts. But I think it would be really beneficial for us to give some thought into that in the city of Burnsville.
Especially with the average size, it seems like, of the businesses in Burnsville. That would be useful.
If you'd like, commissioners, I could add that to your draft work plan for next year and bring it forward to you in January for discussions in your work plan.
I think that'd be a good idea.
Yep.
Great. Any other comments, questions? Okay, a motion to adjourn to be made by someone.
So moved.
A second?
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you.
Thank you.